I am so happy to have my favorite person on to speak about sex with. It's a clumsy sentence, but it's Dr. Jessica O'Reilly or Dr. Jess O'Reilly, Dr. Jess. The description has links to her website and other ways that you can find out more about her and reach her. And thank you so much for coming on to this podcast.
My pleasure. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. So I've gone from the audio podcast, and Dr. Jess and I did a couple of audio podcasts where we talked about polyamory or open relationships, and then we talked about keeping sex and fun and passion alive in a long-term relationship. And so today I wanted to have you on because I found myself recently kind of embroiled in this battle of the sexes. It's more on a social, political, psychological level. I've seen this more within my patients and definitely my classrooms. And so I've been trying to bridge the gap. I don't want to have a battle of the sexes. I want to bring us all together and help us play nice together. So I thought, what better way to do that than to have the master of all things sexual and fun, Dr. Jess, come on and help us discuss how we can acknowledge, respect, and work with the differences between the sexes so that we can enjoy ourselves better. So what I want to ask you was, in all the time that in all the things that you do, and again, people can go to your website and check out more about what you do. Have you seen over the last number of years either a greater divide or the differences between the sexes becoming more highlighted, people focusing on more, either whether it's in the media or whether in your own work with people? What have you found?
That's interesting. No, I haven't seen a greater divide, but what I've seen is more controversy around gender roles as we realize that we benefit from more blended gender roles, right? We see that businesses thrive when all genders are reflected. We see that relationships thrive when you don't necessarily fall into gender roles. If you opt in traditional gender roles, that's okay. It's interesting because I was speaking with someone earlier about whether masculinity is in crisis. And I don't think masculinity is in crisis. I don't think femininity is in crisis. But I do think that we're in a world where we're challenging existing power structures.
Right.
And gender can, in fact, be an element of power. And when you are accustomed to some degree of power and that power gets challenged, it can feel as though it's an affront to your being, an affront to your gender, when in fact all we're saying is, as you said, let's get along, but also let's talk about it. Let's talk about the way gender-based oppression takes a toll on individuals, on relationships. So I don't see a bigger divide between the sexes. What I see is that as gender roles become more fluid, which I believe is quite a good thing, I think that there's confusion about what is okay and what's not okay. So for instance, I believe in gender equality, I believe in gender fluidity, but there are things that are traditionally feminine in a North American culture that I embrace, right? Like I love to cook. I like to cook, and I'm the person, I have a husband, a male partner, I'm the one who does the cooking, right? But I'm not going to reject it entirely because I'm a feminist. No, like I'm a feminist, and I also love to cook. And the range of options, I believe, is a very good thing.
Yeah, you're talking about, let's say, people trying to struggle, I guess, trying to figure out where do they fit in on this gender spectrum, or people are getting caught up with, for example, when you talk about the spectrum or the fluidity, people are saying, okay, is it about being a boy or a girl? Is it just talking about biological sex? Or are we talking more about the roles that people play? Being able to tap into your animus and anima, or your, the masculinity, femininity parts of yourself. Is that what you're more focusing on, about like all these different roles and what it means to be male and female, masculine, feminine, etc.?
Yeah, and I think that, the idea of like masculine energy and feminine energy, we all embrace pieces of that, right? So we hear terms like fluidity and genderqueer, and it's interesting because I am very female presenting. I wear dresses 364 days a year. On the 5th, I wear nothing. But I barely ever wear pants. I'm very female presenting in a North American traditional context. But I also have a lot of, I think, strong masculine energy in that in my relationship, I'm the one who doesn't remember the anniversaries. I'm the one that doesn't want to go to the doctor. I fall into these stereotypes of masculinity, and of course not all men are like that, but it's interesting, and it can be hard for my male partner to reconcile the fact that, for instance, in business, like he has a very successful business, bigger than mine, but mine is higher profile, so I look more successful. And that can, I think, be a challenge to overcome in the context of male-female dynamics, because we value women for other things, but we tend to value men for their financial success. And if he was here, he would tell you, actually, I did a podcast with him the other day. When we met and we were young, we were in school, it was 16 years ago, he was a bar back at a bar, and I was the bartender. So I had more money than him. And he'll tell you, he spent a lot of time trying to prove that he was worthy by building a big business and becoming financially successful. And he only recently, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, he said, who was I trying to prove it to? Because you weren't asking for it from me, right? But his identity and his self-worth became very tied up in that financial success, which is very tied into his masculinity. And it's only with that, with some success and with maturity, that he's now able to say, that's not really what matters to me. Right? That's not who I am. That's not how I want to be remembered. And I did those things because I felt vulnerable. I felt not good enough. I felt like you were the one that, how do I say it? Like there was a hierarchy in the relationship. Like he felt as though he was lucky to have me, and not in a positive way. I feel very lucky to have him. We feel lucky to have each other, but he felt as though almost like he didn't deserve me. And toxic masculinity was a part of that. I think the fact that we're just having these conversations is a good thing. I think women have always had, even though we face certainly more oppression and discrimination based on our gender, we've always had more opportunity with regard to gender fluidity, right? It's okay that I play football. It's okay that I watch sports. It's okay that I don't like going to the spa. Nobody's really challenging my femininity. Now, when I speak up too much in a meeting, then my femininity comes called into question. And as a woman of color, it's layered in an intersectional way. But for men, it's tougher, right? Like I remember growing up, my neighbor was a figure skater. He was a boy, and he was a figure skater. And they would all, talk about his sexuality and his masculinity in a disparaging way because he was this incredibly athletic, talented figure skater. And you don't really think about it at the time. You just, you look back and you're 13 years old and you laugh at the jokes. And I think it's good that we're breaking down these barriers. And I don't think it needs to be a battle of the sexes, especially because there's more difference among women than between men and women. And we talk about that all the time, right? Difference among as opposed to difference between.
Research has shown that when there is that disparity, let's say in income, when the woman is earning more than the man, we do know that there's less satisfaction in the relationship. That's a hard, let's say, belief system to penetrate. Whereas one of my best friends, he's the happiest man in the world. He's the house husband. He's doing what he wants. All his neighbors are all women. Like the housewives are women, but he's the house husband. His wife makes a great living. And there's no rivalry. He's not whipped. It's a great symbiosis because they each play into their own strengths. And, given the opportunity, any man or woman potentially can be a great parent. Now, there may be different biological pressures. The DNA over the hundreds of thousands of years have shaped women to be more maternalistic, et cetera, et cetera. There is something we cannot deny. That's a biological pressure, a biological force. But if someone is not made to feel bad, but here's the sad thing, whether it's the society, their family, their partner, or their internalized sense of all these things, if they're not made to feel that way, why can't they embrace whatever works for them? And that's what I always say, whatever works for you, that's what you got to work with.
Exactly. We really need to see all of these roles, whether they be gender-based or in some other area of our lives, we need to see them as options, right? Like you can pick and choose what works for you. And it's interesting you bring up the data that when there's an income disparity in favor of the female partner in hetero relationships, it's positively correlated with lower marital satisfaction. There would be people who argue and say, see, when women start to take men's roles, it's responsible for eroding marriage, when in fact it's not necessarily the women earning more, but it's the attitude with which we approach that, right? It's the way we internalize that and say, well, I don't feel as good about myself as a man, so I'm going to treat her differently, right? And the way I interact with her. And we also know that women do more of the unpaid labor. And we see that regardless of whether they're earning more, they still do more labor, not in every case, but overall. And so that we know is a significant contributing factor to unhappy marriages, right? Basically, when and it doesn't matter gender, and it actually doesn't even matter what you do, it matters how you perceive what we do. Because I have my days, right? I have my days where I'm like, why am I doing everything? But then I look at it and I say, oh, I actually probably don't do as much as he does. I'm just pissy today, and I'm tired today, and I'm busy today. But it's the perception that impacts the relationship.
It's perception and perspective, and that's something I've been saying for the last little while. I've been really stressing this idea of perspective. Situation can be one way. It's how you approach it, how you deal with it, how you see it. And when we talk about the disparity in who does the unpaid labor at home, there are very few, if any, studies on businessmen trying to balance work-home struggles or responsibilities, whereas there's a plethora of research on women because they are the ones who, again, have this expectation. And even if we're getting more egalitarian roles, this idea of who does what in the household. And of course, when you and I talk about research, we're talking generalities because, of course, it's just, true egalitarianism has not caught up.
No, and the other piece we have to look at is, and this is really interesting that I'm seeing more anecdotally. I was sitting with a group of, I was actually in Turkey, and they were talking about how their husbands don't help out. And these are women who have lots of help around the house, so multiple domestic workers. So it's not like they're physically doing the cleaning themselves or any of the cooking. So a slightly different situation than perhaps many of your listeners here in Canada who actually do their own dishes. They were complaining about their husband's lack of participation. And one of them stood up and said, we set these standards. We want things done a certain way. And then we expect them to meet our standards. But our children don't necessarily need the organic bulgur from that shop in the East End and the piano teacher who's 25 minutes north of the city and the very specialty language class. We create these standards, and it's not always by gender, but we do know that women are less satisfied in relationships than men. We know that the outcomes for married men are much higher than for single men, and we don't see the same significant differences for women.
When you say outcomes,
we believe it's because of expectation.
Right, just when you say outcomes, you're talking about physical and psychological outcomes?
Yeah, so happiness, fulfillment,
life expectancy.
Even living longer, recover, like men who have partners recover from heart attack more effectively and live longer than men who are single. And we don't see the same discrepancies for women, but part of it is that women's expectations of relationships are higher. They're not just different, they're higher. So it's not as simple as saying, well, men need to step up to the plate. They do. And again, we're talking hetero relationships. But women also have to adjust their expectations and say, listen, not everything I want in a relationship can I have. Right? Like I see people running that, and this happened way over in Istanbul, and now I'm seeing it all around the world where I challenge them and say, listen, do you need to be doing all these things? Right? Is it really the end of the world if on your husband's night when he cooks, he just makes pasta? Right? And it's not this specialty, organic, vegan, I don't know, I can't think of any more dietary words. That's enough for me. But we can't set expectations and say, this is the standard to which everyone must live, and he's not even trying. Because, your kid will survive if they have pizza one night.
Right. Perspective, I've been really promoting, because I know the physical health behind this, psychological, emotional as well, is the idea of gratitude, appreciation. And, most people, the thing is, when they hear about gratitude, the first time they ever hear about it, it's usually a parent saying to them, you didn't say thank you enough, or you didn't show enough gratitude to Aunt so-and-so. And it seems like it cheapens it versus a true internalized sense of gratitude. My spiritual mentor, basically, his level of gratitude is somewhere I'm never going to reach. I hope I will one day. He wakes up. He's grateful for the breath that he takes. I can't get there yet, but I'm much higher than I was before, because we know that when you're in that true state of gratitude, it's not paying lip service. It's actually feeling grateful for who you are, where you are, your situation. Even if you've had a shitty day, you can find something where you go, thank goodness for this, and you truly feel it. It's incompatible with any negative emotions when you're in that state.
And it's so important in relationships. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed and I hear my husband's heartbeat, I become overwhelmed, because I'm like, this is what keeps this person alive, right? And I'm thinking, if this stops, the biggest part of my life is gone. I've got to sit here and listen to this heartbeat for a moment, right? And really, really appreciate it. And in a place like Canada, most of the things we complain about are so absurd, right? And I'm guilty of it. I find that as a woman, I get 24 good days a month, and then I get 26, and then I get 2 where I'm just like, oh, I hate everything. Life sucks. Why is this all happening to me? And I have to stop and say, here's a roof over your head. I have way more, knock on wood, than I will ever need. Do you know what I mean? I have everything. And so to get mad about traffic, to get mad about bad customer service from my telephone provider, who shall not be named, and the more I travel, my mother's from Jamaica too, where you see people don't have walls, they don't have floors, they don't have running water, they don't have any irrigation, they don't have a sanitation system. So the things that I'm pissed about just show how bratty and ungrateful I am in the moment. And you have to remind yourself, and in your relationship too, when I'm mad at him, when you're frustrated with them, when they're not picking their towel up off the floor, or they don't remember your anniversary and buy you a gift, you have to remember, like, so this is the person that's going to support me through my entire life, like emotionally, psychologically, practically in some ways. Do I want to get upset about the towel?
Little things, those little resentments, they build up. And this is the number one thing I deal with in couples therapy. I say, regardless of what's going on, it almost always, at some level, boils down to resentment. And people are afraid of resentment. It's funny because I say this in my classes all the time. When I use the word resentment, certain people, it depends on the person, not the sex, but some people don't understand what it means. They go, no, I can't resent my partner. I love them. And I say, no, they're not mutually exclusive. It's two different things. And I define what resentment is. I say, look, it's simply on the most basic level, you feel wronged by your partner to some degree, and you're upset over it. And I say two things about that. One, it's only a matter of degree. You can be this resentful or this resentful, number one. But number two, when you don't address it, when someone's aggrieved you, biologically, we have this need to get back at them. And so if you haven't dealt with it in a proportional manner, it's going to seethe, it's going to fester, it's going to grow, and that's why people end up, snapping at their partner or exploding over the smallest thing. That they end up going in these directions that has nothing to do with the original problem. And so it's being able to recognize that. And I feel a lot of my clients, when I do talk about resentment, they find it liberating. Like, finally, we can talk about this one thing that's been traipsing around because, we didn't know how to frame it, or we were afraid to say that if we did say resentment, my partner would think I don't love them or something like that. And that's the most important thing, underlying so much, because when you talk about having this gratitude for your partner, saying, this person is going to be the person I'm with for the rest of my life, we're going to be a team in many ways. If you have that resentment, you're not on the same team. Now you're in competition with them. Who's done whom worse?
And you're feeding it by keeping it like over here, no, it doesn't exist. You're just feeding it. And I think Canadians are exceptionally bad with negative emotions. Like, we really don't want to, like, no, I'm not angry. I'm not angry. Right? No, I'm not resentful. No, I'm not insecure. I'm not jealous. And I'm like, no, just say that you are jealous. Like, I look at other cultures where they're like, oh, that talking to my man, I am jealous. And we see that as toxic, but at least they're naming the emotion. And if you don't acknowledge it, you definitely can't deal with it, right? Like, at least they're a step, even if they do nothing with it, even if the way they react to their jealousy is really negative, at least it exists, right? I think sometimes Canadians like to pretend that problems don't exist. And I say this because I see so many different cultures and the way they deal with vulnerable emotions, right? Resentment being one, or negative emotions. Right. And so you're absolutely right. Like, it's just the willingness to say, I'm pissed. Like, I am angry. And I wonder if men or women are more willing to express anger. Like, we look at sadness, women are more likely to express sadness, but I wonder if men are more inclined to express anger, if there's data on that.
Well, I know that evolutionarily, men are more inclined to act on the anger, whether it's verbal or physical. Women seem to be more inclined evolutionarily to be able to pick up on signs, because it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. When we talk about evolution, we're talking cave people days. So if a woman is physically inferior to a man, they have to be able to see this and to act accordingly, not to piss off men who could club her to death hundreds of thousands of years ago. Or if she needs to work with the women around her, she's got to pick up on their cues to know, am I pissing her off? I've got to be able to relate properly. So I know that we have data on that. As far as expression, I don't know, culturally speaking, because every time we talk about evolution, we have to keep in mind that evolution, I think, gets trumped by culture. And when I say culture, I mean anything that's not biological, right?
Yeah, and technology.
Oh,
right? Like, we have more options to, like even if we feel the anger, now we have more tools at our disposal. Like, it used to be a few people would go see a therapist. Now, like, we've got therapists on our phone. We've got apps on our phone. And all of these things help. Like, not everybody can go one-on-one to a therapist. Not everyone has that access. But we can fill out a mindfulness app, or we can fill out a CBT form online. And so it's, we have our inclination, but then we can stop and say, okay, so I'm inclined to club you over the head, but instead, I'm going to make a hierarchy.
Right, except the only problem is, and I'm trying to protect my business, but even though all these apps exist, This technology also allows people to take that anger, and before, where they couldn't reach their partner, they act on it right now. They send off a nasty text before they formulate it. It's just instantaneous, and then either the partner responds right away and you just fuel the fire, or they don't respond right away. What are they doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, there's still obviously an important space for professionals. Like, I wouldn't want to live without a therapist. I think but that's my privilege too, that I'm able to have one. Not everybody can afford it, and some of your listeners can right now, and some of your listeners can't. So we have I think we have more tools at our disposal, and we're better off, which is why I think overall human behavior is improving. I know that people like to think that it's the decline of all humankind because of all the videos we're seeing online that go viral. But overall, we see more peace, we see lower child hunger, we see less poverty. Like, the world is getting better.